Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
The easiest way to implement what we're trying to do is to go full blown and just have the confidence that these kids can grasp it if we know how to teach it instead of dumbed down for high school athletes. And by taking the pieces out and trying to make it more simple, you actually made it more complicated.
We're back for episode 3 in season 2 of the Passing Lab with our host, Josh Herring. Josh, thank you again for all the work that you're doing in this series.
Yeah, Keith, I love doing it. Thank you for the opportunity.
So we got Rance Gillespie today. He's the head coach at Brookstone High School in Georgia. What do you have to tell us about Coach Gillespie? For
people in Georgia, and I'm sure in even some neighboring states, Rance is a really well-known figure. Was state championship head coach, was a college offensive coordinator at Georgia Southern. He was head coach at Valdosta. Was actually we didn't mention on the pod, but he's actually kind of a star figure in a book that was written about Valdosta high school football that became kind of a sports bestseller. And Rance has been around a long time. He's had over 30 years in coaching, and he was throwing the ball. I think one of the things that fascinates me about Rance is he was throwing the ball and using West Coast offense terminology and a West Coast system all the way back in the early 2000s. And so he kind of has been experienced in doing a lot of the multiple pro-style spread stuff back in a time when a lot of people just weren't doing that, especially in Georgia.
What are we going to hear today with this conversation with Coach Gillespie?
We're going to cover everything in this talk from kind of his history and his background to his off-season process. His off-season process for research and staff development is one of the best that I've ever seen. And I've done some stuff with Rance before, and so I've actually got to kind of see it in person, and it's amazing. And then we're even going to get into some ball talk as far as he goes over a 3rd and 6 call that he feels like is good against pretty much every coverage and defense, and coaches us up on that.
Be sure to stay tuned for Coach Herring's takeaways from this episode following his conversation here with Rance Gillespie, head coach at Brookstone High School in Georgia.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
All right, want to welcome everybody to another episode of the Passing Lab. We've got a really good one for you today. So we've got Rance Gillespie, head coach at Brookstone High School, with us. Coach Gillespie is a really well-known figure in Georgia football, state championship head coach at Peach County, coach at Valdosta, which people know as Wintersville, winningest program in America, was a 2-time OC at Georgia Southern, and of course now has moved into small school ball at Brookstone and really doing great things there. Coach, we're so honored and excited to have you on the pod.
Josh, I appreciate you having me. I think a lot of the job that you do, and it's an honor to be picked to be on the show.
So, Coach, we'll get into your kind of history offensively. You were a way earlier point than a lot of guys kind of throwing the ball around in Georgia. I mean, there have always been teams who have, but you were kind of on the cusp of being the cutting edge of throwing the ball. You were also doing a lot of West Coast offense style stuff. I mean, going all the way back to, I think, the early 2000s, when a lot of people didn't even have access to that sort of stuff. You might find some playbooks on the internet or something, and people are buying stuff off eBay, doing anything they could to get their hands on that stuff. Kind of walk us through the history of how you got into that and that kind of style of offense, and kind of how you were able to get out ahead of a lot of people when it comes to this type of ball.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really, really fascinating point. Today, people just have so much instant access to so many different things, from playbooks to videos to YouTube, and coaches do a great job of sharing, and with Huddle, and you get all of those things instantaneous. And when I got started 33 years ago, that certainly wasn't the case. So I was influenced, first of all, my first job was in Thomasville. I had a very talented quarterback named Mike Bobo, and his daddy was George, and George did a tremendous amount to influence my style of offensive football from the outset. And we had close ties to Florida State, and they were old school West Coast, and were in the process of combining that with the I. And then we took it back, kind of made it our own. We weren't using a whole lot of West Coast terminology, but we were using a lot of the concepts, so you become familiar with those things. And so that's where it originally started. And then it grew from there. I got a chance to be a head coach at an early age. By the age of 29, I was a head coach, and was able to make my own decisions about the direction I wanted to be, and got a head coaching job for a couple of years, and then was blessed enough to go back to Peach County. And we were really blessed with a really good run of players. And when you have a bunch of coaches coming in to recruit, and one of the guys that came in to recruit was a guy named Scott Leffler, who is currently a head coach. I think he's still at Bowling Green, if I'm not mistaken. But Scott came in to recruit a couple of players that we had, and he was at Michigan. And we were talking ball, because that's what you did, especially back in those days when you didn't have access to all of the videos and the things on the internet. And you would hem a coach up and try to drain them for as much ball as you can. And you still do, but especially then. And he said, well, why don't you come up for a couple of days? So over the course of the next 2 years, I did that. Over spring break, I would go up and spend 3 or 4 days at Michigan, and really got into the full-blown West Coast concepts. Each year they hired somebody to come in and speak to them. And of course they videoed it, and I got to watch those. They had Sean Payton there one year, who is West Coast. Some of his verbiage is not completely old school with the Shanahan family. And then Alex Gibbs one year, which was a big zone guy. And that influenced me a lot. And we just kind of ripped the Band-Aid off of it, because what I was doing, I was coming back, taking these concepts and trying to fit them into something that it just became more and more difficult to do. And we finally just said, you know what? The easiest way to implement what we're trying to do is to go full blown and just have the confidence that these kids can grasp it if we know how to teach it, instead of dumbed down for high school athletes. And by taking the pieces out and trying to make it more simple, you actually made it more complicated. So yeah, we went full-blown West Coast terminology, full-blown West Coast concepts. And of course, we're not having to prepare for as much as you are at the next couple of levels. But this is the best thing that we did. Our kids grasp it. It is not your run-of-the-mill high school offense. It hasn't been for quite some time, but it is a system. I think that's the biggest thing. And I think that's where a lot of people get lost and tied up in the weeds, is you don't really have a system. And that was something I felt strongly about from the beginning.
Yeah, it's really cool, the small world aspect. Andrew Coverdale's been on the pod before, and he specifically brought up Scott Leffler as a guy who was a huge influence on him when he was at Michigan. So the idea of high school coaches that are getting information and being mentored in certain ways by these guys at the college level, it's kind of cool in a world, like you said, where now any 22-year-old in America has access to almost anything they want.
No
as
doubt.
far as X's and O's. And that's, of course, why teaching and everything else has become that, that's really how the X factor.
You get a lot, but the education of coaches is becoming better and better and better, and rightfully so. You're getting guys that are exposed to a lot quicker. And I don't want to sound like the old guy that says, oh, we had to go work for it, but we had to go find it, but it doesn't make us better coaches. These young guys are exposed to a lot more early on. I think it's fantastic. I think it's fantastic for our game.
It is, no doubt. So I know through some of our past interactions, I think, and it's not just because you're on the pod that I'm saying this, but you do as good a job as anybody I've ever seen of all-season research and study. And what I'm kind of interested in is, and we've asked this of several different guests that I know that are good at this, but kind of what makes you decide, hey, this is a team that I want to study or that I want to look at or they're worth studying. This is how we're going to dive into this. And then if you could kind of just tell our listeners a little bit about your process of how you go through this and go as in-depth as you want. I know there's some things we may not be able to reveal on here, but just kind of talk us through that off-season process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that, Josh. I've said for a long, long time, when my passion dwindles for wanting to learn this game, it'll be time for me to retire. It's something that I've always had a passion for. I enjoy learning the game. Even after 33 years, the game evolves. And even the parts that don't evolve, there's so many little things that you can learn and get better that I've always taken the off season to study something. When I made a commitment to be a coach, I made a commitment that every day until I retired, I would try to do something that would make me a better coach. And I've stuck to that. It's like any other routine that you get into, it becomes a habit. So I found a habit that I truly love. What you're referring to really started when I was at Valdosta. I had a really strong staff there and some really smart guys and some guys that had a passion for studying the game as much as I did. Of course, we did all the clinics, and I was fortunate enough to be close with Mike and be able to go to Georgia and visit them. And Will Muschamp was a teammate of mine in college and was able to go to Florida at the time. And so we had access, is my point. We would always access those things, but we wanted to kind of expand from that. And so I gave each one of my assistant coaches a team. And I said it could be any team that they wanted, but to study them, okay, and bring back something that they had found in that study that could apply to our offense. Because I think we're all guilty of coming in on a Sunday afternoon and saying, hey, did you see Ole Miss play this weekend? And they were doing this or they were doing that. Or it's not that you're reinventing the wheel, but it is very stimulating to maybe, golly, I've never thought about doing that from 3-by-1, or I've never thought about doing that from this formation. So there's always stuff that you pick up. And so it really depended for me personally what I was trying to get out of it. It may be a concept that I'd caught a team doing. It may be different variations of wide zone. We're a big wide zone team. It may be quarterback technique. It could be a wide variety, or it may be multiple things of that. But each year, and I hope I can do this without cutting you off, I make a list of things that I want to accomplish in the off season. And I'll read just some of those that I've got this year. Complete Georgia offensive study, complete Miami offensive study, complete Shanahan offensive study. So there were 3 teams that we were looking at, okay? And then I wanted to look at a goal line menu from the 49ers. We could be a little bit more creative with what we were doing on the goal line, create a garnet zone menu. So pretty specific on some of those things anyway, and I won't bore you with all of them, but there's a list of 21 different things that I felt like I wanted to know more about. And that kind of started with me studying some of these teams. And then you follow up and try to confirm that with contacts that you have or whatever kind of resources that you can find. And so it grew from just my staff. So when I left Valdosta and went to Georgia Southern, I was kind of out of that loop for a couple of years and then got back into high school coaches, and all of my staff at Valdosta had kind of split up. And I was like, we need to get together and do this study again. And so instead of it just being one staff, it grew to about 4 or 5 staffs, which made it really, really cool for me. And I always got the year that you brought in the stuff from Pittsburgh. I thought that was just fascinating on the, it was all West Coast stuff. So it was applicable, but the drift drops out of the oversets and all of those things. And then even to add in some true spread elements, like our guy from Lee County that brought in the stuff from Tennessee, and be exposed to something outside. But for me, I was always going to study what originally started as Walsh, grew into Gruden, grew into Shanahan, grew into Kyle Shanahan, McVay, the guy that's at Green Bay now, what's his name? LaFleur. And then even the Falcons had a little bit of influence with it, and the Dolphins are huge right now as well. So those are kind of the teams that I stick with, and that's kind of who we model ourselves after.
So I'll just add to all this awesome stuff that Coach is saying that if you want to talk about something for professional development, there's just not much better for a young coach in professional development than to study a team and break down a team and then present that to somebody else, because of the preparation that you have to have and how in depth, and you're going to have questions. If you're a young coach out there that's looking for professional development and maybe people don't know you can't get into the clinic circuit, whatever, it's a great way to kind of improve at your craft. I would just say that for sure.
Absolutely. The questions are where you grow. And that was true for me, because it was like I would get a question at those things, especially as we grew into larger groups, that I was like, I've never really thought about it that way, which kind of broadens your horizons a little bit. And so it was so much fun. I mean, it really was.
Yeah, it's awesome, Coach. So let's go right into some real just deep down X's and O's. So let's say it's 3rd and medium, and there's a pass that you just want to tell listeners, look, you need to run this. This is a 3rd and medium. Maybe it's a multiple defense, and it's kind of got to be an every down call that regardless what you're in, you feel good about it. But give us something that you feel really good about right now offensively on like a 3rd and medium passing situation.
It's got to apply to multiple coverages.
Well, you can apply it, Coach, to whatever you want to.
Yeah. So I get the chalk last. I get to win today.
Right.
Yeah. So I think and not to date myself, but this stuff has kind of evolved, because I think 3rd and medium at some point was a stick under down, 2x2 stick to one side, unders to the backside, or double slant to the backside, because you were getting so much fire zone pressure. And of course, with the horizontal spread, that really was applicable to what you were getting at that point. And then everybody kind of evolved into maybe a too high fire zone pressure. And so you started going to the drive concept, and you got everything thinned out. And now kind of going full circle, and you're getting a lot of sims and some 4-man pressure with playing 3 deep, and you're going back to like a snag under concept. So to just hang my hat on one would probably make me itch all over and break out. That's kind of been a problem of mine throughout my career, is I like all concepts, and just narrowing it down to the ones that we can actually execute and the ones that we can actually do. I think that's the beauty of football, is there's a lot of concepts out there that we can all understand. And I think having the talent and the ability to pull them and use them when they're applicable is the beauty of the whole thing. But if you want a deep dive on one, I would say snag under. It was a day one concept in West Coast football, where if you can just picture a 2x2 and 11 personnel, so you got a tight end on one side, and you're going to take starting with what we would refer to as our Z to the tight end, and run him on a 5-yard snag, which is he's not going to cross the wake of number 2, which will be on a corner at 10. 3 would be the back, and we're going to be in a 5-man pro here, and we're going to send him to the flat. And then a lot of people run 2 slants on the backside with those 2. We actually do what we call unders. So we take the slant out of it, and it's just an easier landmark for the receivers, because getting the exact angles right out of 2 of them on the backside can be a little bit challenging. And some people teach the first one flatter and all of those things. But we don't. We just go with 2, what we call unders. And then for the quarterback, it's an ATB. Now, there's some things that can accelerate. ATB meaning across the board. We've got different reads that we teach our quarterback to group those things as far as neither or. In other words, we're working this side or that side, or an ATB, which is across the board. So we kind of communicate those things. That would be an ATB for us, meaning that we're going to start with the flat. Okay, so we got to free release the back. We'll be in a 5-man protection. And then we'll go corner. There's a lot of things that we can get to accelerate off the corner, basically eliminate the corner to the snag, to the first under, to the second under.
Gotcha. So on your under coaching point, just if it's like day one, you're teaching the kid how to run the under, kind of what are your coaching points there on the back?
So we're basically going to run the same thing that we teach on our hitch, okay, which is 3 fulls, okay, 3 bigs and 2 quicks.
Right.
And then we tell the first guy, if you want the ball, you better be physical enough to rip underneath whatever it is that's walling you. So if you can picture a quarters type configuration out of your linebackers and 3 linebackers underneath, and the first one relates to the flat and 2 relates over to the snag, and the first under is getting walled by the wheel backer, say, okay, he's got to be able to beat the wheel. Okay, if he wants the ball. So he's got to be a physical guy. He's got to be willing to get dirty and be physical with that guy. The outside under is taught completely different because we're going to tempo him off of 2. And so he's got to be able to feel what's going on with the inside receiver. And if it's straight man, we want him to separate. So, yeah, those 2 unders are significantly different. And it's the reason why we went to unders, because we do feel like they're a little bit easier to coach, a little bit easier to get on the same page than the 2 slants.
Yeah, no doubt. What fascinates me about that, so obviously we can talk about snag because everybody in America runs snag, but it's like zone and verts that everybody has slightly different coaching points on all the little nuances of it, and I love that. But what's fascinating to me about the under part, like one of my offseason projects has been all of the new Shanahan, McDaniel backside tags are kind of non-traditional in that most of them are underneath routes more than 15-yard digs, let's say, or a 15-yard post curl. Now, they have that stuff, absolutely, okay, in the system because the systems have so much volume. But all these new ways, if you think about, and I've talked to different guys about this, but if you think about a quarterback being under duress, it is easier to find those guys that are a shorter throw and underneath throw when you're having to throw off platform or you're moving in the pocket than it is to have to climb the pocket and rip a throw between linebackers, on a 15-yard dig. You guys reading that across the board, I mean, what I'm saying is really cool to me. I think that's a cool idea, and I think that's something that's applicable from day one in high school. In teaching a quarterback, you want to start working on across the board reads, and can this guy work a progression and can he process? But it's also a way to get the ball out fast that holds up even with a 5-man protection. So
I think that's the biggest thing. That may be the biggest thing that I holler about is getting the ball out and playing in tempo. One of the things that's fascinating to me, I was fortunate enough to coach a kid named Brian Ellis, who is now the tight ends coach at Alabama. And Brian played quarterback for us at Peach. We got him his senior year. He's a talented kid, but he had never done the things that we were doing. And so everything that we do is very, very rhythmic, and put him in gun for the drive concept. And he came to me, he's like, Coach, can I stay under center? Well, that's a 7-step drop, which is kind of intimidating for most high school kids. He's like, gun screws up my rhythm on it, which meant that he got it. He understood. Yeah. And so it was actually hard for him to go back and forth because it is 2 rhythms, a gun rhythm and an underneath rhythm. And you go back to the old school stuff and you see the stuff on YouTube of Bill Walsh talking about it as a dance step and all of those things with Joe Montana. And if you're doing this stuff, it really is. And so to my point in getting the ball out, that the freshman throwing snag wants to gather to the flat, well, then everything is screwed up from there on back because you're completely out of rhythm with the play. And understanding that each concept that we do has a certain rhythm that you want to stay within is, I think that's the biggest piece to learning how to play quarterback for us.
Yeah, if you want a kid, I mean, in preparation for the next level, and this would be 6 podcasts to start talking about this stuff, but being able to that carries over to every offense. If you can do that, then you can play quarterback. If you can stay in rhythm and you can process and you can work your way through a progression. There are guys that can still be successful quarterbacks in different systems, and maybe they never have to do that. But if you can do that, in my opinion, you can play in a system.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because we all want that kid at that position. They can play off platform. They can play out of phase. That can move around a little bit, especially in today's game, because defenses have gotten to where they're going to get home. And you just got to have a guy that can maneuver and work his way through that. It's part of the game now. But if that's all he can do and he can't play in phase, you've got a problem. And I've got a kid right now that's a little bit like that. He's kind of a backyard guy. He's talented. He's got some things that he can do. And there's certain individuals in the college game that I won't mention any names, but that you see them, and it's like you put a cage around them when you take that. But they've got to be able to do both, in my opinion. Got to be able to play in phase, got to be able to play out of phase in today's game. But I agree. I think you start with in phase. And then out of phase, a lot of times, a little bit harder to coach and a lot more about their natural ability.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal point and just very true. And you're seeing it more and more. There's been a little bit of in the offseason, there was a movement about people talking about some well-known quarterback guys about, hey, it's okay to work on rhythm throws when you're doing your quarterback training as well. It doesn't have to be all things that Patrick Mahomes does, which are amazing, but he's one of one. So
no doubt.
Let's work on throwing a speed out in rhythm. So, Coach, we'll wrap up. I've got one more question. I love to ask this one. This is kind of a question we ask of all the guests. What is your pregame routine? And I know as a head coach and play caller, it's going to be different. We've had different guys that are head coaches kind of give the experiences of how their day's different than when they were a coordinator. But kind of how do you get in rhythm, getting ready as a play caller throughout the day? Do you have a routine or superstition? Just kind of take us through what your routine is getting ready to call a game.
All right, so we're talking about just Friday.
Sure, yes.
Okay, all right. So there was a guy that I thought a ton of. Okay, his name is Jerry Moore. He was head coach at Appalachian State for a number of years, and I actually was going to GA for him. And I was standing with him. They're getting ready to play Furman for the conference championship. I'm standing in the locker room with Coach Moore, and I'm like, I got to get out of here because he's got all this stuff going on. And he looked at me and goes, son, it's Saturday. I'm done. And I think that resonated with me a lot. I think it's all the stuff that you do leading up to Friday. And not to be a comedian, but this is one thing that I will admit to you in front of a lot of people that I have done is if a certain pair of underwear is hot, I make sure that I have them on. And I tell my coaching staff that the very day that I go into a locker room and I don't feel like I'm fixing to throw up, 30 minutes, 15 minutes, 10 minutes before game time, it's time for me to quit. And I've always had that. I had it as a player. I have it as a coach. It's the same feeling. As far as getting in rhythm, we script, and it's just a feel. And if I'm not having a good night, you'll see me play closer to that script. And if I'm having a great night, my assistant coaches may be going, where in the hell is he coming from? Because you're just in a zone and you just feel it and you just see things and you're like, you see an end that squeezes too hard, chases you down from the backside. And so you know that you want to go to a naked or a keeper or whatever. And you just see a corner aggressive on a slant and you call up a double move or different things. You see bad leverage on a flat that ends up turn into a wheel. And so those nights where you're in tune, it's like anything else. You know, some nights you are and some nights you're not. And those nights that you are, those are so fun. But the nights that you're not, you better have a really good, solid plan to fall back on. And that comes with a week of preparation.
Yeah, definitely. That's what it comes down to. If you've done the work, then you're going to be ready to go on that night. That's really, really good. Are there any issues being the head coach and having to deal with all the wild stuff that may just pop out of nowhere on a Friday night as a head coach? Do you feel like, hey, I've already put in the hours and the time, I'm ready for this, that I can deal with those things when I'm going to have to call plays on Friday night, that I don't have to, are you I sit in a room for 30 minutes before a game and I look at my call sheet or I write stuff down, or are you kind of like Coach Moore, you said, where you're just ready to go?
Yeah, no, I'm more like him. I really am. By Friday, I put my own call sheet together, and I do that throughout the week. So by Friday, I can tell you, and I've been blessed with a pretty decent memory. And so I can tell you what the third call on 3rd and 1 to 2 is by Friday, because I put it there. Been in situations where we had larger staffs, especially at Georgia Southern and at Valdosta, where we doled some of that out. And in those cases, I had to make sure that I got on the same page with those guys and what they were thinking. And, we let them do a little bit deeper dive into those areas and let them have ownership in the call sheet, which was huge. But when you're doing most of it, it's maybe even a little bit easier to remember.
Yeah, that's really good. Coach, thanks so much for being on here. Really honored you came on the show. I know there's a ton of things that people are going to get from this. I've got a couple pages of notes already, but just really appreciate you, and best of luck to you guys this season, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Josh. I appreciate you having me.
Here are Winning Edge takeaways from this outstanding conversation with Coach Gillespie. Coach Herring, what do you have for us here today? What were the things you really focused on and took away from this conversation?
Yeah, anytime I'm talking to somebody like Rance, who I just have utmost respect for, I'm going to take a lot of notes and go through a lot of stuff. But some stuff that stuck out to me in this episode, one thing Rance said that I wrote down immediately and highlighted was he talked about he has always had this vision since he started coaching that he wanted to do something every day that was going to make him a better coach. And I think clearly, you can go overboard in different ways with your personal life, but that's not something that's insane to think about. Like no matter what you do during the day, to think, okay, how can this, even if it's relational with someone, what can I do to make myself a better coach? I think that's people that are really driven in this profession and want to be great. That's something you can take from that. And it doesn't have to be an X's and O's thing, or even, a teaching an individual technique thing, but just something that's going to help you relate to people, communicate better, because we know how multifaceted coaching is. A second thing was I loved how he talked about he had lists of things to accomplish in the off season. So as far as if they weren't good, if you're not good at a certain player, you're not good at a technique, specifically, what are the things we need to get better at this off season, or that we feel like we need to study? I think too many times we kind of go into clinic season and sort of look for the hot thing, or say, I want to listen to this guy. They had a lot of success this year, and being more systematic of what does our program need? What are the things that we're looking at? And Rance, of course, went over some of the things this off season that he's looked at for his program. I think that's just a really good way to go about your off season study. And kind of to piggyback off that, his off-season study method that he broke down is just incredible. And the idea of giving your assistants kind of the autonomy to say, I want to study this program, or I want to study this team. Can you help me get that film? And then having them present back to him and find out stuff that applies to their program. I mean, what a great method of staff professional development, and a way to get young coaches on the same page. I just think that's really, really good. It's something we've kind of tried to copy in programs I've been a part of, and Rance is kind of the backbone behind that, as far as one of the first people that I ever talked to that had done something like that.
Definitely a ton to learn here from Coach Gillespie's experience, and he did a great job here breaking that down. Another great interview here on the Passing Lab, and we look forward to continuing this through the summer.
Yeah, look forward to it, Keith.
Be sure to visit coachandcoordinator.com and check out the 10% Toolkit, which highlights our partners and some of the offers they have to you as a listener. The link to that is in the show notes. Follow all we're doing at coachandcoordinator.com, and follow us on X at Coach K. Grabowski.